Well, let's open it up for more comments, insights, questions from our audience.
I'm just curious about what you think has been the fruit of this movement is the participation of the young men in our generation or the next generation. Do you think that that has had such an impact that they're supporting the women, or you don't think that that is has come to be, or are there a lot of conflicts in that sense? I know the old generation is probably not so active in that sense, and there are a lot of conflicts. But what about the young new men?
I'm going to take a few, thank you for that. I'm going to take a few questions and comments, and then we'll throw it back, just because I realize the time we're getting towards the end. But yeah, so, but please, more.
That was a great question.
Yes, great question, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the words. So I want to circle back to your comments and question about the binary discourse between mainly in post-colonial feminism about hijab, as you mentioned, but also I kind of want to just go back as a comment and to my experience, but then I want to ask a question about our responsibility as diasporic scholars or activists. When I'm talking about that kind of binary discourse, as an Iranian woman who came here around 10 years ago, encountered that very binary that existed for such a long time, right? Being this oppressed victim woman versus a terrorist that you have to choose to stay, right? And that was the very main reason that I kind of, I started to transform as a person, and I started to change my background and studies and everything. And I was just curious to know what does that mean. And now I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology, and I've been dealing with that question since the beginning of my graduate studies here in New York. Right, I mean, New York and other places, of course. And around before the start of Gina Revolution, I was set on my idea of how to deal with the post-colonial scholarship as a way that it was so centered around Western-centric idea, and at sometimes felt like we are just, as diasporic Iranians and sometimes other Middle Easterns, we are not alone. We had the same kind of discussion at graduate center that I'm affiliated with, and there were so many Lebanese, Palestinians, and people from Yemen who felt the same thing, right? And the idea was, how do I normalize? How do I go about, say, Islamic Republic and not be targeted as Islamophobic, right? Mm-hmm. Or hijab. But then, for me, as my personal experience was that around a few years ago, I was done with convincing the Western-centric scholarship, post-colonial scholarship, right? And I was thinking, how am I supposed to go my own way and not to be targeted by both ways? And the very reason was that in 2018, I went for field work back in Iran. I started to talk to people with the language as well. I was trained here, and I was told that I talked like a state TV. So that was really a good example, right? And I mean, it was, for me, I always knew it growing up, how all these discourses are being instrumentalized, but I never understood why, how, until I had to, when you are in a scholarship, you understand, you read the histories. Now,
sorry, just because of time, can you?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So this is my question. I actually want to phrase my question in a different way, and that's how, let's say, us as we identify ourselves as feminist scholars, diasporic feminist scholars, are we doing the same thing in Iran? Are we helping to create, to normalize, to publicize this discourse in Iran, where people are not also familiar with what's going on, or are we just trying to convince the Western-centric, the transnational, which is not, I mean, it is transnational to some extent, but we can see how power relations are playing right here, right? So what is our responsibility to do back in Iran rather than being involved, and and how does that can, as you mentioned, right? How do we get involved, all those Middle Eastern feminists, into our conversations rather than be stuck in the diasporic, semi-transnational, so-called transnational conversations, right? And I've been thinking about that a lot, that what is my responsibility? And I don't understand, I don't know how to do it. I try and I get stuck in between conversation, between discourses. And I'm wondering if, have we done anything since last year? Are we thinking about doing anything? Or have we been thinking about it or not? So that's my question.
I see. Yes.
I'm not an scholar, so I'm just a regular person. So for me, the thing that you said about how convincing like the Western feminists to understand that what you're talking is not Islamophobia is kind of like the way I came to US around 10 years ago. I should say that I voted for reformists a lot. And I kind of deal with this thing that how I ignore my basic right of the freedom of what I want to wear, and always said that, okay, hijab is not a priority, and voted for reformists. And I'm trying to actually forgive myself for what I did. And I kind of feel that the way that we are trying to approach this thing of how to convince Western feminists to be with us is kind of like that, because I need to, and I want to say that it's not a popular opinion. I kind of understand the zero tolerance policy of Jewish people, because I feel that the rage inside me is growing to form a zero tolerance policy. I can't tolerate anything saying to fantasize about Islam. For me, this hijab is kind of like the tattoo that Jewish people had. And whenever I say that I hate this tattoo, some people will say that, oh, but we love our tattoo. I don't care, just go get whatever tattoo you want. And I kind of feel that, and the way as it goes, my distance getting more with Iranian, like inside Iran, as she said, I kind of understand that I'm kind of sounding like the way that my generation was talking with reformists. We were quoting Quran, saying that la ikraha fi din, all this thing. But we see that this generation said that I will, like, not I peace in this Islam, but I also peace on the other Islam that you're saying that is not this. So I don't want to repeat the wrong thing, the thing that I did when I voted for reforms, that I kind of build my standards of what my basic right is.
Okay, let's give folks a chance to respond. We have a question about the role of the young men, and also this very big question, right, about our relationship to sort of the way that post-colonial and transnational feminism has been formed in the Western Academy, and sort of the being really stuck in between these sort of state discourse of the Islamic Republic and then that discourse. And how the Jina Revolution maybe challenges both. I think would like to jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you want to go?
Yeah, before us talking for 5 minutes, we should go first. I just want to say something about what you said about reformists. What's your name? Leila Ju. I do get the sentiment right now that whoever that went to the ballot and dropped the votes inside the ballot box made a huge mistake. And look what would happen if you don't do that. I truly disagree with that idea. I do think that part of the reason that the revolution ignited the way it did was the fact that we had already tried all the possible venues of change. We had tried every possible route. So in people's consciousness, there was this sense that nothing else is working because we were there and we tried it. And now the only thing that works is the streets. I don't think without having done that, we would be here. And let's not forget that for many of us, probably including you as well, reform was for us an instrumentalist project. We wanted to say, what can we get out of it now? Not that what we can contribute to the reform project for the longevity of the Islamic Republic. So I feel like because there has been such a paradigm shift, as Fatima explained so beautifully, there is this sense that all the previous decisions were all sort of false, and we have to condemn them. Even the 1979 revolution was a huge mistake. I think the opposite. I think what's happening now is part of that history, and it's sort of, if you look at even the intellectual movements in it, it does sit in that genealogy of all the thoughts that was put forth and was examined and evaluated. Part of it was kept, and some part of it was discarded because we could see it in practice. So maybe because it is a moment of self-criticism, and there's so much of blaming, both on the self and on other people. I think doing that vote was a good idea because
yeah, I understand it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of questions that are related, not related. I wanted to respond to your question about young men. I think men in general, why young, older men?
Can you explain them?
Younger ones, middle age, we want them all in this revolution. All of them. Age does not matter. And I think like the other day when we were at the protest, that was one thing that really like stood out to me. I'm like, where are the men? There were only like really a handful of men in that group of people who are gathered to just like kind of commemorate this very, very grand day for all of us. And I'm thankful for all the men who have, identifying men who are in this room and have been contributing to this discussion. I think we need more. Definitely more men needs to be included in the conversation. And I want to express the fact that women life freedom, again, it's not only about women. The liberation of men relies on the liberation of women. And it's so important to understand, like really truly understand this. It's not like just words again. It's like, hey, like liberation is partially what the state is taking away from us, but also liberation exists within us. You know, like we have so many chains that as people who are brought up into these ideologies that we have put on our own selves. So let's not take the word freedom so lightly. And I think it's a question that every single person needs to ask themselves. Go internally, do whatever spiritual journey they need to do to just realize, like, what are my own chains? What are these things that are holding me from being able to relate to this world in that full way that I really aspire to do? And I think for a lot of men, it actually exists there, you know, to realize that what are some women or relationship that they had to some women have changed themselves from who they are. And I think if we have a little bit of that happening, that conversation, that shift, it's that it's not that I'm here to save the women. It's not. It's like, think about it, like you're saving yourself, you know? It's not like we're doing, like a lot of women are standing in the forefront of this movement and they're putting their lives on it, and it just had also sparked from the life of a woman and many others. But I definitely feel that there is a little fear in space that some men are not feeling maybe welcomed, or some don't see that this relates to them, or some are busy, some are shy. And I really want it to be an invitation to all men to think about it, to think about their own personal experience. What are some moments in their life that they felt that they had shackles or they had chains on their body because of these kind of like oppressions that have been on in relationship to many women around them. And once you're able to break that, you're breaking your own shackle. And I just really feel that it's
well, I wanted to, these are very important questions. Yeah. We can talk about them for hours, but very quickly, I think, again, part of that shift and transformation that has happened for me was in a way summarized in this 2 minutes video that came out of Mashhad, that probably a lot of you, especially Iranians in your room, have seen it. two women go to the grocery store, and a morality police agent comes and asks them to wear hijab, and they refuse to do that, and he throws a bottle of yogurt on their head. And in response to that, what is fascinating, I think, is that the shopkeeper, the man, comes out of his way, beat up the morality police guy, and kicks him out of his shop. So see, this would, I mean, growing up in Mashhad, right, I could not imagine this. I mean, the two women going without hijab, a morality police agent coming and they're insisting that they're not going to wear it, and then the shopkeeper coming out of his way, and his shop was shut down. So for me, that is revolution, right? That is revolutionary, and because it's a fundamental transformation in the norms and values and of the society, and that collective notion of solidarity between men and women. Let alone the fact that all the seven victims of execution over the past year all have been young men, a lot of them athletes. And I think that is very intentional and purposeful, that they choose who they're executing.
Absolutely.
That, you know, that embodied masculinity that kind of comes out, you know, for liberation of the self. And I think, you know, that's the liberation of the self and the other. So one is, and I think, thank you for that question, because I think that's important. When we say the word feminist, a lot of the people, a lot of the folks, especially Iranians, get suddenly men. They feel their masculinity is in crisis and they have to do something. They suddenly feel like, oh, what's going to happen to us? And I think that if you look at what has happened over the past year, particularly how men have been responding to this, it's truly transformative and just inspiring to watch. So that's one thing. And I think the question that Leila, if I'm remembering her name correctly, sorry, I forgot your name. Your question sort of for me comes to the same, you know, to the same notion of this deep gap and distance between the diasporic efforts of constantly theorizing this, you know, and in a way othering, you know, this other remote part of the world that, you know, how do we, you know, how are we going to theorize them and conceptualize them? The notion of difference is always very interesting, so we need to keep them different than us. And this hijab actually does a very good job. So, you know, as long as they have it on their head, they look different. Once you take it off, I think it sort of shatters all those, you know, categories. And I think that's precisely the challenge that a lot of, I think, our folks in academia are facing at the moment. And when I repeatedly said that we need to revise and rethink, re-theorize, that's exactly what I meant. And I can't agree more with Leila, especially as someone who not just voted for the reformists, in fact was a reformist at the forefront of the reformist movement, you know, actively working for the youth movement during 2009. But I want to also tell you that when you said that you used Quran, you know, verses sometimes in order to put forward an argument, to me that's the definition of intelligence, and the definition of just knowing how to use and instrumentalize religion when you need it in order to, you know, in order to advance a cause. And to me, that's not necessarily being, you know, deceived by a certain ideology or being deceived by the reformists. I don't think it was a mistake to vote. I think, in fact, it was a step that we had to take in order to arrive at where we have arrived last September. Otherwise, this movement, and I think you mentioned it, Kimia, and again, and I think this is really just important to remember and remind ourselves that if we didn't come this long, and if we didn't take this path, we couldn't answer certain questions to ourselves that how did we arrive here? I think the reason that we have the answers is the life that we live under the Islamic Republic, and it's extremely important.
Do you want to say any last comments? And we're over time, so we have to wrap up. Yes.
I just want to take us back to your question, and I'm not going to answer it. I don't have the answer to it, but I might just try. I'm gonna do my best, okay? So I feel like this is actually one of the questions that I had when I like started the whole like graduate school, like this question of how can you actually talk about the damage of Islamicism, like it has had like damage on our lives without falling into the hands of like white supremacists. Like how can you actually talk about like all of this simultaneously? And I feel like Manija has done a great job in her book actually talking about this whole like rejection of like both of these binaries at the same time and saying no to all of them. But at the same time, I feel like as people who are producing knowledge in English in the US, we have a responsibility toward our audiences. And we have to be aware of the politics of leadership here in the US too. So I feel like this is gonna like complicate our work, but it doesn't mean that we have to, you know, to maybe dismiss like or be dismissal of the lived realities that are actually like happening on a day-to-day basis in Iran or in the Middle East. So I feel like it's gonna take time because it has taken decades for post-colonial knowledge to be produced and sustained. So it takes a lot of time for the decolonial knowledge to be produced and be actualized in academia and in activism. So let's give it some time and work our best.
Perhaps the notion of political Islam will help you. I think what's happening in Iran is the rule of political Islam that makes everything, it brings Islam to every, imposes it in fact, a particular interpretation of that on the everyday life of the people.
Can I just
sure.
Make a comment? I think I'm done with this side, right? Like I got into that realization of how to navigate this side. What I'm thinking after the start of the Jina revolution is that the same thing is happening between us and people on the ground in Iran. And we are doing the same thing that has been done to us. Because if I'm not able to take my feminist discourse back into Iran and talk about it in a way that people understand and get attracted and wants to know more, how am I using it, right? And then I think we are making this stance a bit, I don't know, so for me it's the other side, right? What is our responsibility at this very moment back in Iran, more than
So we can continue these conversations informally in the reception next door, but I just want to join me in thanking our amazing